Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining another episode of Next in Queue. My name is Rob Dwyer, and this is the podcast about contact center and customer experience professionals. Joining me today, thank you so much for taking the time. Fred Stacey, how are you?
I am good, man. Thanks for having me on. It's about time, man. I've been watching you forever and I keep waiting. When's Rob gonna ask? You're finally here.
I had some people on my really my initial short list that I was like, well, I know these people will say yes. And then I had some people I was like, oh, these people are really intriguing. And then I had my people where I was like, I should do this for a while before I ask them, because I don't want to be a hot mess when they show up on the podcast. And you were on that list of people I was like, I'm going to get to Fred and hopefully he'll say yes, but I need to knock a few episodes out before we get there. So
I appreciate it, brother. You should have brought me on when you were a hot mess. It would have been fun.
I may still be a hot mess, so let's not discount discount that. So you are a contact center technology expert, and you've spent the last 20-ish years in that space.
Yep.
You've recently started your own consultancy, but you got started in the contact center like a lot of people. And that's actually where I want to start. So let's go back to the very beginning. How did you get into this crazy business?
So interesting story. I came out of school and I had to get a job. So I went to work in Iowa, where I grew up. I went to work at a manufacturer, and I got my hand. I was stacking physical doors, picking up a door off a conveyor belt, stacking it onto a cart, which then they would push. And, I had a little bit of a loose glove on while I was doing it, and the roller caught my hand and pulled it in between the roller. Now, it didn't do like serious long-term damage, but it did some damage, right? You could imagine an industrial roller pulling your hand down into in between two rollers. They tried to, after a little bit of time, they sent me to a company doctor. Gave me some pain meds, said it'll heal, tried to put me back on full duty, stacking, doors with a hand that I can't grip. And I was like, okay, this isn't for me. Right. So I went to hunt for a job, and I found a call center. Back then it was call centers, right? We can safely say that without offending the contact center people. The call center was hiring, and I was like, okay, well, it's a job, right? So I went in and I got on the phones, and I found out that actually I was pretty good at this. And I was asked to train a pot of people on a product sales, and I really love training, right? So I was like, oh, I like doing this. I got a little jazzed. I hated talking in public when I was a kid, first of all. I mean, let's be clear. I wasn't one of those debate kids that loved being up on stage. I wasn't in choir or I was in choir, but I wasn't in drama. I didn't like the stage, right? I didn't like talking. But I realized when you're passionate about something and then you get up in front of people, it's fun, right? I get the energy, I get the endorphins and all that stuff. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So I went from on the phones selling to a trainer, to a manager, to a director, to a VP, to helping companies start new call centers or recover failing ones. I even did a recovery in a medium security prison. As contact center or call center was failing, and I went in and helped reset that org and put in new leadership, and that was fun. Eye opening, dude, really eye opening. And that's where I learned. This cycle of starting as an agent to growth. We're talking like a 6-year timeline. I mean, this is not a big timeline, and in the scheme of things. And the contact center industry is really the only industry that you can do this, in my opinion. And we talk about, I don't know if you've ever heard anybody say the call center MBA program. But essentially saying that in running a call center, today's world, the contact center is the best way to learn business in all of its depths at the volume that you do, right? Because you're talking about, sometimes hundreds of people as indirect reports, with multiple direct reports, running KPIs, running balance sheets, understanding performance indicators, how to improve, how to motivate, how to handle, HR issues. I mean, I had a couple of ladies go fisticuffs on one of my call center floors, dude. And as a young male, trying to get in between two women, that are literally swinging at each other. Let me tell you, you learn things inside a call center, leading that you will never learn anywhere else at that scale, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's how I got started, man. Just a guy on the phones, needed a job, and it quickly progressed from there.
Yeah, you touch on some things that really hit home for me because I had a very similar experience, and getting into the contact center was an accident, right? I needed a job. I was making a career transition, and I continue to tell new hires in this world, you can make a career out of this. You may not be thinking about this as a career for me right now, and I get that. Like, if you are brand new, or maybe you've been on the phones and this is your third or fourth contact center, right? That happens too. You can make a career out of this. And I really do mean a career where you can move up the ladder if you want to learn and take it seriously and treat it like a career. It can absolutely be that. And you don't need a degree, because you're going to learn everything you need to learn within the contact center, and you're going to learn a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, that's an understatement. I don't think people talk about that enough. I mean, there's plenty of people like you and I who came up through the ranks from the lowest level of being on the phones all the way into executive level leadership, right? And I took the path of tech,
Yeah.
because it was shortly after that where I was a partner in a long distance firm, and I had acquired a call center, a dialing platform, right? And we did it on a lease, and that was right before we were selling. I was brought in as a partner to build out their B2C market, because they were primarily B2B up to that point. And then the WorldCom debacle happened, right? And we were low down on the list of people that owed us money, or that they owed us money, and we ended up having to file bankruptcy, close the doors, lay everybody off. And I took the server back out to the software company and met the CEO. And that's that guy, Steve Biederman. And that was back in the TouchStar days. He's been my mentor ever since. We stay in contact to today, but he's the reason I got pulled into tech. I love the software side, and I've always been able to learn things quickly, pick up by doing, solve problems, and take that information and simplify it down to anybody, right, and deliver it. That's what pulled me into tech, man. And I mean, here I am today. I've ran Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pacific, been the COO, done some startups, been in the software side forever. And it's taken me a long way. It's just from being an agent. So I don't think people talk about that enough. That this industry is one of the very few places that truly can give you a career path and multiple different branches you can go, right? I went tech. I've seen some people grow to running, multiple call centers throughout the world, and then eventually building their own and, doing very well. I mean, like I said before, the contact center will teach you more in a shorter period of time than you can learn anywhere else. Because where else do you have that kind of scale of leadership, right? And KPI management, and I mean, you don't get that exposure in any other industry, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, I agree. So we're going to talk about the tech side a little bit here in a moment, but I'm curious. So were you a computer kid? I mean, were you banging on computers as a kid, or was
Oh
this new
man,
to
of
you?
course not. Of course not. I grew up again in small town Iowa. My dad was a retired Marine, came out of the Marines out of Vietnam and became a trucker, just like his dad came out of Korea and became a trucker. That's what they did. My mom was a CNA at a nursing home. And back then, truckers and CNAs didn't get paid what today's world is, paying those people, right? These were relatively low paying jobs. So we didn't have a lot of money. We rented, a house on a farm from a family, and, we didn't own farmland, right? But I was a big kid, so as soon as I got to a young enough or an old enough age where I could actually be put to work, I was put to work. So I was stacking hay, walking beans, detasseling corn, cleaning out hog barns. Let me tell you, dude, that is not a job. So I grew up, I worked my first 18-hour day by the time I was 13, right? Out on the farm, stacking hay all day, sun up to sundown. And that's how I grew up. I didn't touch computers. We had a computer lab, in our school where I got to go in for one class, and touch, word processing, right? And learn how to type. I mean, it was basically like advanced typewriter. And I did have a class, by the way, in typing. I'm
Me
that old.
too. Me
I
too.
didn't touch computers, right? I was not a tech kid. The one thing I did do though, I had this, I always loved to figure out how things worked, right? And I do it on my own. So I had this, get this GI Joe, like house, this thing, and it had a motion sensor on one of the areas. So I pulled this motion sensor out, and I actually connected it next to my doorstop, so that when my door opened up, that alarm would go off, right? That's the type of stuff I did. I'd get something electronic and I'd play with it, and then I'd be like, huh, I wonder how that works. So I'd pull it apart and put it back together. But I was never a computer guy, right? I didn't touch real computers except in that lab, until I was, out into the job world. So.
All right. So Fred, Iowa farm boy, literally.
Yeah.
And now, after spending what, 6-7 years in kind of operations within the call center at the time, it was definitely a call center.
Yeah.
So you moved into technology. So what was that initial, like, what were you doing technology wise when you first made that transition?
Yeah. So, during my time running call centers, and you've been in this game a long time, back then I had to touch the servers and the physical devices, right? And I mean, that's where I started to get exposure to that technology, because, there were green screen applications, an old EIS platform. First one I ever touched was half my size, the server size, and it only could sustain 24 agents, because back then, there was no D channel. It was PSTN, right? It was a traditional T1, and the board that I had to change out was like, I mean, I took both my hands to pull the board out of the server. And then I implemented, and worked with the team, through the TouchStar group to implement that software in the company that I was at. So when I got pulled into TouchStar, I had already had exposure to the platforms, running the platforms, operating, loading lists, with the old green screen up to the GUI interface at TouchStar. So I started to get early exposure to all this stuff. But what I really started doing, I mean, first of all, when he said, I'm going to absolutely hire you, I just don't know what I'm going to do with you. Eventually he decided that I needed to come aboard to build a training program, right? Because I was a user, I was a buyer. It made sense that, because I love training people, I love mentoring, and it made sense for me to take that on. So I spent the first few years building out the training program from nothing, to eventually getting to the point where we were university model, training both in the US and our overseas organization. And then I did some time in engineering, which is funny considering I wasn't a computer guy, but, I understood the cycle between, the users, the buyers, and then the implementers, and then, all the way through the journey. And back then we didn't talk about it as journeys, right? It was just a process. But I understood how to help people navigate along that process, and how to, identify, friction points. And I mean, all these words that I say now, I didn't use them back then, right? I was just like, oh, well, that's a problem. That shouldn't work that way. And so, and then eventually, our Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pacific group were struggling, and Steve asked me to take that on and move it forward. And then I got exposure at a much grander level, right? It gave me, first of all, I was in, thousands of centers around the world, right? And we had operations in Europe, operations in the Philippines, and then operations in India. And each one of those kind of managed their regions from there. And I got exposure to the clients, the buying cycles, all the things going on in those markets. So, I mean, yeah, that's how the transition went, man. It went from, running centers to all of a sudden, I'm going to build out a training program, which I had never done. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So it's really exciting stuff. So just for those that aren't familiar with you, I want to set the stage a little bit, because the last, 4 years or so, you were with Outsource Consultants, which is a large company that sources BPO partners for companies that are looking for a provider. And among other things, you did some technology consulting for those clients. And so you've been exposed to a lot of different technologies within the contact center across all kinds of different call centers, right? Different sizes, different businesses that they're involved in, different locales, right? So kind of this really big spectrum.
Yeah.
And then, here we are. It is, when this airs, I think it'll be late February of 2022. And so we're not quite 2 years removed from, the before times when when everything was normal, and contact centers were starting this transition, this process from a technology standpoint of really kind of beginning to migrate to the cloud. And cloud stuff had been around for a while, but we're kind of starting to see a critical mass. And then all of a sudden, March of 20 hit, and everyone went, oh, we got to go home. So I'm curious, a couple of things, right? Number one, what did you see when that happened? And now that we're 2 years removed from that, what are the gaps that people are still trying to figure out? Because my sense is that we didn't just all move to the cloud and everything's hunky-dory in 2 years.
No, not even close. Right. I mean, it's so far away from what I would have expected for the last 2 years. So first of all, let's step back to 2020, right? I mean, we were talking like globally, 80% of the market was still on premise globally. Yes, we were starting to adopt, right? But it wasn't at scale, and we weren't tipping the needle as much as what you would have thought, because I mean, it was the mid 2006, 2007 when hosted contact centers started to come around. And we were starting to work on, the cloud 1.0 versions, right? Starting to separate the architecture and figuring this stuff out. And so you think about that in a scale back in 2020, that means 14 years we've been playing around with hosted to cloud 1.0, and starting and legitimately being in cloud 2.0 as of 2020, but it still hadn't caught traction really. And that's our industry, right? If you look at certain segments inside our industry, let's talk about outsourcing. That hasn't changed in 26 years since I joined this industry. The margins are super lean. They still deal in just primarily staff. And although some of the biggest ones in the world are starting to buy up, technology companies, and they're starting to kind of merge together, fundamentally, it's still about putting a person in a seat to answer the chats, the emails, the phone calls, and give the best possible experience. Now, yeah, I mean, I'd say that we're significantly better at it than we were 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. The quality of outsourcing has changed. But the fundamentals of it haven't, right? It's not like that's been somehow
Right.
disrupted. And so in 2020 hit, right, and we were all sitting there. I had just came back. I got sick as heck coming back from CCW in Nashville in January. I got home, was starting to prepare for the year, start hearing about the rumblings around COVID, and then all of a sudden March hits, and we all go in lockdown. People scramble, right? Now, during that time period, I was spending a lot of time talking to people about their technology, their stack, where are they at, how do they migrate forward, and then throughout that period until, a couple of weeks ago when I decided to make the transition out on my own as an independent, I continually did that. And it amazes me actually how few people really did truly adopt cloud. I mean, I heard crazy things, man. Like people, do you remember what ringbacks were? Do you
Yeah.
remember ringbacks to nail up an agent? Okay. So that used to be a default, kind of failover function, where you could ring an agent. They'd go off hook, meaning that the phone was connected to the telephony platform. And then the calls would go out the other channels. And when they got a live person, it would reconnect them over to the nailed up agent. Well, the problem with that is you have an agent connected to the system over a phone call for 6.5 hours a day out of their 8-hour shift. That's expensive, right? If you
Yeah.
scale that across thousands of agents, that's ridiculous money. Well, I mean, these guys are, that was the solution to get agents up and running at home. Hey, we'll nail up a connection via phone and a ring back to their cell phone. I was like, are you serious? Yeah, I mean, people throwing cheap UC platforms in between the premise-based dialers and connecting the agents at home. Look, people did whatever they had to do to get their customers'
Yeah.
calls and chats answered. And some of the largest companies in the world still haven't figured that out, right? I mean, you're still hearing about hours of wait time in certain organizations, and I won't call anybody out, but we've all heard the stories, right?
Yeah.
Due to
Yeah.
COVID, 2 years later, we're still talking about due to COVID, your wait times are extended. It's like, really, so I've actually started to hear some of the analyst reports, and this may come as a surprise. Most people in the industry don't even realize this. Globally, 60 to 70% of the market is still premise-based for the telephony. Now,
Wow.
let me clarify, because I had to, I made a comment in a video about, just talking about CCaaS, right, in general. But it's the telephony, because if somebody started to do a digital transformation, the only way to get the digital channels is by going cloud, right? That's,
Yeah.
you have to. So, but for the telephony, that's a big gap, right? You would think that'd be down below 50. No. And I heard a report, it was put out by, I didn't hear, I read, gosh, who was it? It was an analyst firm. I'll think of it later. They put out a report that at the enterprise level, it's 80% of the market is
Wow.
still premise-based for telephony. And that's a critical piece. So if you think about those numbers, and this has been reiterated to me time and time again, talking to these clients that, I mean, there was one client that their IT staff upgraded their premise-based Cisco just, like a year and a half ago, spent gads of money because it was already in procurement. All they had to do was upgrade it. And they spent gads of money to upgrade their old premise-based Cisco. And stuff like that happens all the time,
Yeah.
right? The old Avias are still out there. I mean,
Yeah.
the old Cisco's are still out there. I mean, heck, every once in a while I run across an old customer of Touchstar and they're like, "Hey, I still got that For You box running in the closet." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" But that's the way we are, right? We run, typically a contact center has historically been a cost center, right?
Hmm.
And to me, the executive suite over the last 10 years talking about CX being their focus, is all smoke and mirrors, because when it drives down to the actual people that impact and interact with your customers, they're still rocking 20-year-old, 10-year-old premise-based systems that don't integrate, that don't have an omni-channel experience, that don't give any data of any value without significant overhead. So, but I that's changed, right? I think that's finally changed, where I mean, we're all being compared now to Amazon and the greatest customer experience companies in the world. That's who we're getting compared to now. It's not verticalized anymore in comparison to who you buy, or why. Everybody expects, the Uber, the Amazon experience, the disruptor type of experience where things are effortless and just work, right? So,
Yeah.
and that was a long answer. Sorry about that. You got
No,
me, you pulled the string, man. And
I love it.
you asked for it.
I think it is important for us to recognize that even though we all of us were impacted, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
even the organization I worked for was already primarily work from home, right? We had already moved to the cloud, but we were still impacted, right, in a lot of different ways. And I think everyone feels like, oh, well, the world has changed. And it has. It's changed in a lot of ways over the
Oh yeah.
last 2 years, but there are still technology hurdles that we haven't made that transition yet. We haven't moved to the 21st century technology because, like you say, maybe I just sunk a bunch of money into this right before. And, I'm looking at that's a huge sunk cost. And I don't want to just toss it out the window so I can move to the cloud.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's, we in the software side, we're like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you migrate to the cloud, right? And here's the business stakeholder. They've already bought this, right? They maybe are paying for support, maybe not, doesn't really matter. But when they do the cost analysis of 140 a license, and that's just the CCAS, right? The omni-channel. Then you add the WFM, the WFO, all the tool sets to get around what a modern, stack looks like in a contact center in MRR. And you start look at the annual cost and you're like, wait a second, I can't afford that. I mean, we all think, oh, but it's cheaper. And we've done this study since the hosted, right? I remember
Yeah.
when 5.9 first came out, and we were just starting to do, hosted cloud-based platforms, right? Everybody's talking about it's cheaper, it's cheaper. I was like, no, it's really not. Once you reach a certain size, when you get to 500 seats, it used to be 500. The calculation has changed significantly. But it used to be when you get to 500 seats, you already have the staff, so you're not going to get a staff reduction and move into the cloud from supporting servers. You
Right.
still need all the network infrastructure, right? You still
Yeah.
need, back then we were still using punch down blocks to get down to the agents because we were doing TDM and different routes, and before soft phones really become readily, viable. And the calculations haven't changed all that much. It costs a company a lot to run a modern stack. And
Yeah.
most companies don't even put their calculations of their actual CRM into their overall contact center costs because that's a sales and marketing budget line. So for these big companies, I don't blame them. I can understand it. If I'm an operator running a contact center and have all those line items on my budget, and I'm looking at the MRR for this stuff, and you're telling me that, oh, but it's cheaper. No, it's not cheaper. It's not even close to cheaper. So that's no longer an argument. Now, the fact that you can never, as an organization, you rebuild and redesign the redundancies, the security mechanisms that these vendors put in. I mean, they're doing it at scale for thousands of clients, right? Versus one company trying to replicate it themselves. And there's all kinds of values that you don't normally calculate into costing to make cloud migrations worth it. But the reality is, if you're not on cloud, you better be, because the digital transformation is already here. You have to have modern APIs. You have to communicate with different platforms to create that effortless experience that everybody talks about. You can't do it on a premise-based platform. I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
Not in a way that your customers aren't going to feel a pain. So there's no choice anymore. It's now they have to move, which is why I'm so excited to be back into software, right? As my focus is, I mean, people don't have a choice. That's a big market opportunity, in this world, to be able to make a difference and really help these clients, identify that, how to get through that change, right?
Yeah. And it is a big jump because it changes so much.
Oh yeah,
So even if you just look at from a hardware perspective, right? We're not even talking about the server room and all of that.
right.
Let's just talk about the agent experience, right?
Yeah.
If I'm a relatively large contact center and I'm running on-prem, I've probably got physical phones, right? As soon as I move to the cloud, I got to figure out what to do with all these phones. Guess what? Nobody wants your phones.
No.
Like nobody wants your phones. The headsets that you have with those phones are not going to work the same as the headsets that plug into the computer, right? Because they're not USB headsets. So I got to get all new headsets for everyone. And then there's some training that is associated with that as well, because I got to teach people how to use that new platform.
Right.
So while I feel like a lot of people jumped, clearly not everyone jumped.
No.
And you would know better than I, but that's in some ways that's good, because if you make that jump without the right kind of planning,
Yeah.
it can really blow up. It can be
Oh,
bad.
without a doubt. I mean, and there's plenty of examples of that, right? I mean, the migration from cloud to cloud is more common than the migration from premise to cloud. So, with that being said, that a lot of people, made snap decisions to do, and I had to help a client out do a from soup to nuts selection to implementation and deployment of a CCaaS vendor in less than 30 days. Because they were getting strong armed by their vendor and they weren't going to tolerate that. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of people, they did make bad decisions, or they put stop gaps in place in order to allow them to make the good decisions. Now, the fascinating thing, I think, is, I'm a technologist, that, but I'm also a big believer in people first, then processes, then technology, right? Putting a new widget in does not solve your problems if you don't have the people and processes in place to make a contact center function properly.
Right.
So I think the people piece over the last couple of years has been the biggest change in the dynamics of a contact center, in particular in the North American market. This labor crisis is a lot bigger and it's going to last a lot longer than what people think. I mean, you take the average person that's going to work inside a contact center, right? Younger generation or older generation, depending on what they're looking for. Well, the younger generation has resoundingly stated that they do not want to work in a contact center. They don't want to work for the man, right? They all want to be entrepreneurs. There was a study that said that 80% of all millennials wanted to be entrepreneurs, which is awesome. I love entrepreneurs. I think everybody should figure out some time in their life to try to head down that path if they find their passion. But I mean, our country is clearly stating that I will not work in the same kind of roles for the same amount of pay that I did before this all, because I'm just not willing to sacrifice. And that's not going to change. And the people that believe that they're going to automatically send people back to the office are learning in a hard way what real attrition can look like when you try to force agents who don't really enjoy their job, who have a tough job, who don't really get paid all that much. Those agents are not going to drive and commute to your call center or contact center now to sit in the brick and mortar. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of the older leadership regime thinking that they need to maintain their thumb on all of their agents, that's just, I mean, to me, it's silly to believe that that's okay. And that's the way that we're going to operate moving forward. So work from home in the contact center and customer experience space is here to stay. I mean, in my opinion,
Yeah.
And in North America, you're really going to have to start taking a hard look. Is the US market really the right place to have your agents? Because, if you don't have somebody who loves their job talking to your customers, then why aren't you finding people that love their job? And the people that love that kind of job, maybe you're not in the US market. I mean, maybe you can go to a place in Latin America, South America, Caribbean, that is a great middle-class job that they're absolutely excited to have and proud of, and can build a career. And that's what they want to do. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe the market will crash and people will have to get jobs, and we'll go back to the idea of hiring the next warm body to throw in the center in the US. I don't think so, though.
I don't think so. I think the piece that a lot of people are discounting or not taking into consideration, and you mentioned this a little bit, is that older generation, like that generation of baby boomers, they're retiring. They are hitting retirement, and they are saying, I got my Social Security.
I'm out.
I'm out. And
Yeah.
like that is the single largest generation this country has ever seen. And you're starting to see that generation migrate very quickly out of the workforce, even at the younger end of the baby boomers, right? This has been going on for a while, but that kind of younger end of the baby boomers who were born, in the early 60s, late 50s, like they're starting to retire now. And we had, some of your best call center agents sometimes were in that generation. Like their people skills were amazing. Their computer skills sometimes weren't all that great to begin with, but their people skills were amazing. And so, it makes it really hard to find the people that you need. And at the same time, you've got this whole reckoning of people deciding, I just don't want to do that, not for that pay, whatever that pay is, and whatever that job is. They've just decided I can do something else.
Yeah. And I think, with the improvements in outsourcing, with the improvements in processes, with cloud computing, there's going to be, it's going to continue to push all of the contact center jobs, at least at a certain level, to outsourcing and nearshore and offshore markets, right? And we're more forgiving. When we first launched outsourcing in this industry, we weren't very forgiving as a society, right? I remember when all the computer companies were, Microsoft and Dell, were all going to India, and people were just up in arms about the struggles with the accents. Well, the world's changed, right? It's a lot smaller. We're a lot more, tolerant and open to all kinds of things, right? I have a bunch of Indian friends that live around the United States now. And, we just accept accents. We're just better about doing all this, about the idea of outsourcing, and it's more open, and it's because of the timing, the costing, all the things that I already said. It's just going to drive those jobs, outside of the US. And that's okay, because in reality today, I can build a full stack completely virtualized. I can turn up a BPO, I can turn up 10 BPOs, with a virtual desktop modeling, completely secure. I, as a client, own 100% of my stack. None of my data is out in the open. It's all mine, and I get to know exactly who and what's going on in my entire organization, including my outsourcers. And that's, with GDPR, with California data protections, that's the future of the contact center technology. Is it's one full stack delivered in a virtualized secure model anywhere in the world. So the work anywhere starts to become work anywhere securely without any risk, and with less management, because I can roll out a virtualized environment in no time just with credentialing, and you're completely secure and safe and locked down. So we've got a long ways to go, but all these things are just leading to, in the end, what I think the market is going to look like. So.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to me to see, because you're right. At this point, it really is easy to spin up a contact center anywhere in the world, as long as they've got solid internet and a solid power grid, and there's somewhere where there's not a ton of outside noise. Right.
Right.
Because I've talked to other people on the podcast. I had a couple, they own a contact center in American Samoa. And when they started, they had their agents working at home. It was a huge struggle, right? They had solved the internet and they had solved the power issues, but they still had roosters crowing outside the windows and whatnot. And they ended up, building a facility so that they could avoid that. But that's, I think, right, if you have those components, the rest of it is, I just need the people, and I can turn it up in no time.
Right. And the funny thing is, the background noise can be solved with a simple AI plugin that can remove all background noise. So, all this stuff is solvable today with technology. And, you really need, like you said, you need the backbone, you need the power, you need the infrastructure. That's been one of the biggest risks about the Philippines and this whole migration is, once you get outside of Metro Manila or Metro Cebu, the infrastructure starts to get a little questionable, and they get hit by a typhoon a year, right? So there's that risk dynamic. I think that's another thing that's changed because of the pandemic is companies have finally realized that their geo redundancy model was, first of all, non-existent in most cases, and their backup and disaster recovery plans weren't complete, nor were they tested, nor were they ready to actually deal with. Nobody was ready for COVID, right? We weren't even ready for even half of what. It was crazy, right? We started to recognize where our gaps are, started to get smarter about business. Geo redundancy, infrastructure redundancy, smarter decisions are being made. And I believe that's because we also now have a lot more visibility and data, information and insights, and, we're getting better. And I do feel like, I know I bag on the enterprises about, being given lip service about CX for so many years, because they did, but we are getting better, right? Companies really are finally committing to, changing the dynamics, because they recognize that there's too many choices, and consumers they'll leave a company in a heartbeat. Nobody has any loyalty anymore, period, when it comes to buying products, right? If I can find it cheaper and better, if I can find better service, most people will pay more. So there's a lot of interesting things going on, but I think we're getting better. We're trying, at least,
Yeah. One of the things that I know that you'll have some insight into, so when I first was an agent, and this was around 2010, I actually worked at home. So we were doing work at home back then.
Yep.
And that model got tested, and this was with a BPO, and I'll, for the sake of everyone involved, I'll not name names, but there was a data breach for one of the clients, and that client was like, no more work from home, right? in particular, right, credit cards, highly sensitive. And I think there is still, for a lot of companies, whether they're insourcing or outsourcing, it doesn't matter, right? They're like, well, I've got sensitive data and I'm not going to allow my people to work from home because I got to protect that data. But again, this is a problem we can solve with technology. So what's out there today that can, like, for a minimal investment, solve this problem, and we can still have people working at home dealing with these sensitive things?
Define minimal, right? Let's
Well,
I mean, let's
okay, fair. This is fair.
yeah, I mean, so what's out there, right? I mean, I've been talking about this since 2020, that there are actual, PCI compliant technologies that you can easily implement as an overlay into your current stack, whether your premise or cloud, doesn't really matter. No one cares. There's ways that you can get customers to pay or provide PII without actually the agent hearing. And that's the key, right? If you're going to do true PII from home, and all the PCI certifications of level 1 certs by third parties, none of those right now are really scratching the surface of the reality. So, I mean, even the banking, the fintech was like, I know you need to go home. I know it's not quite PCI compliant, but it's okay. That stuff is going to come back and bite a lot of people. It's just a matter of time, right? So the technology you have to bring in, right? Things like an agent has a simple button on their screen, and as soon as they get to the point where the client needs to give the credit card information, they can say, I can send you a text to your smartphone. You can fill out and process your credit card on your own, or I can send you to a voice, a voice platform and let you do it over there. Either way, I won't personally hear this. This is for your own security, but I'm not leaving you, right? And that's the
Right.
key. A lot of people tried to solve this with an IVR transfer to a payment processing IVR. And that's fine, but it fails, right? There's too many fail points in there, which creates a terrible customer experience. And then, somebody fat fingers a number, and it's awful, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm more of the proponent of the digital, converging the voice and the digital, and using like a text message, or just send them to an app or a portal that's secure, so that it validates that who they are and what they do, right? And you can get as far as doing validations through biometrics to, I mean, there's all kinds of solutions to ensure that the right person is actually paying, yada yada. So there's all
Right.
kinds of stuff you implement in the contact center, or even I mean, most stuff I believe can be done like that. It's simple pre-call, AI bot technology to capture, identify, make sure, validate, and then let the agent experience and the customer be about solving the problem, right, and giving them the best experience. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. The challenge, I think, with at home is HIPAA. So HIPAA is a
Yeah.
fascinating one, because there's a lot of healthcare companies that got nurses at home, and everything you do on a HIPAA call is patient information, right? And
Yeah.
that's the challenge. Now, when someone says, I run primarily in the healthcare industry, so I need to bring my workers back to the office because I truly am not HIPAA compliant. I'm like, okay, so that's fair. There are solutions, but you would need a lot more of you would need a lot more stack, right?
Yeah.
There's some
Yeah. It's a
things
bigger
coming out.
challenge.
Yeah, there's some cool things coming out, like camera technology with fisheye that actually shows and identifies if the right person is there through biometrics, if there's any pen or paper, any recording devices, stuff like that. But that's a challenge right now with, I think that technology will be standard in maybe 5 years, once we get past the fact that, look, if somebody comes into a at-home work office, that is a work office, and contractually they have to agree that they're going to follow all guidelines and compliances, right? Most companies do that today, but they don't really force the agent because they don't have the solution to solve that HIPAA piece for at home.
Yeah.
And they're coming, they're getting better, lowering costs. I mean, just like any new technology, it takes time to get viable for the marketplace.
Yeah, very interesting. It'll be interesting to see if those people in those fields decide, no, I'd rather be in a brick and mortar environment rather than have this, what amounts to surveillance in my home office,
Right.
or if we're comfortable enough with our smart devices listening to us all the time anyway, that we're like, what's one more thing?
Yeah, and the reality, if it's used appropriately and set up and configured appropriately, right? It doesn't have to be surveillance, as in, it's actually displaying on some big monitor all of the cameras around someone's household. It should be a view of the desktop, and it should be a view of the person and anybody or anything standing behind taking screen captures, right? And then you should
Yeah.
have some desktop analytics to understand what they're doing with the data. Those are the things you should do. And you can do that today with some of the technology where everything's blurred out and lets you have this super admin password to validate that, if a biometrics pops positive, that it might not be the right person who's been trained, in PCI and HIPAA and is certified to be the agent on the phone. Then you can then, with special credentials, you can go in and log in. But I mean, I think in the end it'll be fascinating. I think that's a piece of our landscape that's a little bit of a nuance that I would say it wouldn't surprise me if the healthcare industry, for true healthcare related calls, not just like answering service healthcare, but true deep dive healthcare type of calling and service and support, that goes back into brick and mortar, because
Yeah.
there's no other way to truly secure patient information, unfortunately. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, very interesting. Well, hey, if somebody out there wants to geek out on technology with you for their own purposes, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
it's funny. I say this all the time, and people are like, "Really?" It's LinkedIn. Really, what it all comes down to it. Look me up on LinkedIn. Message me. People are always shocked. I will. I believe in building a network, right? I believe in having conversations. I believe in helping people out. Whether it has any advantage for me or not, because in the end, I mean, that you could say your network is your network, your net worth. You could say all kinds of cool things, but in reality, I just like talking to people, man. If you
Yeah.
can't tell, I love this stuff. Clearly what I do, and meeting new people is always awesome because I always get different perspectives. And I'm a big believer in gathering data and information and making decisions from that, and yeah, so LinkedIn is first. If you want to check out, aincx.com, that's my website. And those are the two easiest ways to get a hold of me. And on my LinkedIn, I have all my contact information. I just don't, I'm not one of those guys that hides that. I'm like, if you're a sales guy and you think you can sell me, go for it. Have fun.
Shoot me that DM and let's see what happens.
Yeah, let's see what happens when I accept your request and you instantly pitch me by a bot. It's but I just don't worry about that stuff, right? I mean, yeah, it is what it is.
Well, we'll make sure that those links are both in the liner notes. So anyone wants to get in touch with Fred and learn some more about what he's doing, or just take some time to geek out on technology, because I know that you absolutely will do that.
I might. I mean, you never know. Yeah, I love it. And the industry too, and
Yeah.
leadership and building organizations and entrepreneurship. I'll geek out with anybody. I am an absolute nerd. It's funny, people. I lift a lot. I've been an athlete in my life, but really deep down inside, I'm a total nerd. Absolutely. I can't help it. Everything that I love and I'm passionate about, I can't help but dive extremely deep into. So there you have it.
This,
Reach out
this,
anytime.
this is why we get along. I understand.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, hey, I am so glad that you took the time to join me today on Next in Queue. It's been great talking to you, and I know that we talked about some pretty deep stuff, but if you're into the technology side of things or kind of thinking about where this industry is headed, I know that people will have enjoyed listening to this today.
Yeah, I hope so. I appreciate you, brother. I'm glad you had me on finally, and yeah, I had a blast. This is great. Yeah, everybody, if they're not following you, they better be. This is good stuff, dude. I love it.
Well, I
I
appreciate it.
appreciate
I
it.
appreciate it. And hey, for all of those watching on video, this is the first time we've done it on Zoom as opposed to Teams. So I'd love to get some feedback. If anybody likes one or the other, the way it comes across on video, certainly let me know. All right, Fred,
Was that a
have a
plug?
fantastic, yeah, you know, like trying to drive some engagement, you know, like the kids say, mash that subscribe button, I think is how
Right?
you're supposed to
Mash
do
it.
it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Fred, have a great day. I appreciate you. We'll talk again soon.
Talk soon.